Only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
Boys are playing basketball around a telephone pole with a backboard bolted to it. Legs, shouts. The scrape and snap of kids on loose alley pebbles seem to catapult their voices high into the moist March air, blue above the wires. Rabbit Angstrom, coming up the alley in a business suit, stops and watches, though he's 26 and 6'3". So tall, he seems an unlikely rabbit. But the breadth of the white face, the pallor of his blue irises, and a nervous flutter under his brief nose as he stabs a cigarette into his mouth partially explain the nickname, which was given to him when he too was a boy. The ball, rocketing off the crotch of the rim, leaps over the head of the 6 and lands at the feet of the 1. He catches it on the short bounce with a quickness that startles them. As they stare, hushed, he sights, setting his feet with care, wiggling the ball in front of his chest, one widespread white hand on top of the ball and the other underneath. Then the ball seems to ride up the right lapel of his coat and comes off his shoulder as his knees dip. It drops into the circle of the rim, whipping the net with a ladylike whisper. "Hey!" he shouts in pride. "Luck," one of the kids says. "Skill," he answers, and asks, "Okay if I play?" There is no response, just puzzled, silly looks swapped. Rabbit takes off his coat, folds it nicely, and rests it on a clean ashcan lid. He asks, "Hey, whose side am I on?" In a wordless shuffle, 2 boys are delegated to be his. They stand the other 4, though from the start Rabbit handicaps himself by staying 10 feet out from the basket. It is still unfair. Nobody bothers to keep score. In 10 minutes, another boy goes to the other side, so it's just Rabbit Angstrom and 1 kid standing 5. This boy is the best of the 6. He's a natural, the way he moves sideways without taking any steps, gliding on a blessing, you can tell. With luck, he'll become in time a crack athlete at the high school. Rabbit knows the way. In his time, Rabbit was famous through the county. In basketball, in his junior year, he set a B-League scoring record. He sinks shots one-handed, underhanded, flat-footed, and out of the pivot, jump and set. He feels liberated from long gloom, but his body is weighty, and his breath grows short. It annoys him that he gets winded. When the 5 kids not on his side begin to groan and act lazy, Rabbit quits readily. "Okay," he says. "The old man's going. 3 cheers." To the boy on his side, he adds, "So long, Ace." Rabbit picks up his folded coat and carries it in one hand like a letter as he runs. Up the alley, past the deserted ice plant, ash cans, garage doors, fences of chicken wire caging, crisscrossing stalks of dead flowers. The month is March. Things start anew. Rabbit tastes through sour aftersmoke the fresh chance in the air. His big suede shoes skim in thumps above the skittering litter of alley gravel. Running. At the end of this block of the alley, he turns up a street, Wilbur Street, in the town of Mount Judge, suburb of the city of Brewer, 5th largest city in Pennsylvania. Running uphill. Frame homes climb like a single staircase, the fronts are scabby clapboards, once white. There are a dozen 3-story homes, and each has 2 doors. The 7th door is his. The door is locked. In fitting the little key into the lock, his hand trembles, pulsing with unusual exertion, and the metal scratches. But when he opens the door, he sees his wife, sitting in an armchair, drinking an old-fashioned, watching television turned down low. "You're here," he says. "What's the door locked for?" She looks to one side of him. "It just locked itself." Janice is a small woman whose skin tends towards olive and looks tight. Just yesterday, it seems to him, she stopped being pretty. "Well, what are you afraid of? Who do you think's going to come in that door? Errol Flynn?" She doesn't answer. "If you're home, where's the car? It's not out front. It's in front of my mother's. You're in my way." He is blocking the television screen. "In front of your mother's. That's terrific. That's just a friggin' place for it. What's brought this on?" "Brought what on?" He moves out of her line of vision. She's watching a group of children called Mouseketeers perform a musical number. Janice asks, "Harry, do you have a cigarette? I'm out." "I'm giving it up." She looks at him at last. "Holy mo, you don't drink, now you don't smoke. What are you doing, becoming a saint?" "Shh." The big Mouseketeer has appeared. Jimmy, a grown man, who wears circular black ears. Rabbit watches him attentively. He respects him. He expects to learn something from him, helpful in his own line of work, which is demonstrating a kitchen gadget in several five-and-dime stores around Brewer. He's had the job for 4 weeks. Jimmy sets aside his smile and his guitar and says straight out through the glass, "A wise old Greek once said, 'Know thyself.' Now what does this mean, boys and girls? It means be what you are. God doesn't want a tree to be a waterfall or a flower to be a stone. God gives to each one of us a special talent." Janice and Rabbit become unnaturally still. Both are Christians. God's name makes them feel guilty. Janice gets up and turns off the set when the 6 o'clock news tries to come on. Rabbit asks, "Where's the kid?" "At your mother's." "The car's at your mother's and the kid's at my mother's? Jesus, you're a mess." She stands up, and her pregnancy infuriates him with its look of supported lumpiness. "I was tired." "No wonder," he says. "How many of those have you had?" He gestures at the old-fashioned glass. "I left Nelson at your mother's on the way to my mother's to go into town with her. We went in her car and walked around looking at the spring clothes." She falters. Her little narrow tongue pokes between her parted lips. He feels frightened. When confused, Janice is a frightening person. Her eyes dwindle in their frowning sockets, and her little mouth hangs open in a dumb slot. He married relatively late, when he was 23 and she was 2 years out of high school, still scarcely adult. Nelson was born 7 months after the Episcopal service in prolonged labor. "I'll run over and get the car and bring the kid back," he says. "You must feel he has no home. What the hell makes your mother think my mother has nothing better to do than take care of other people's kids?" She moves into the kitchen, angry but not angry enough. Why is it always a struggle with her? She drops something metal, a pan or a cup. "Think you can make it without burning yourself?" he calls in. "You still here?" is the answer. Why is it always a struggle? She used to make things easier before they got married. She could be sudden then, just a girl, nerves like new thread, skin smelt like fresh cotton. Her girlfriend at work had an apartment in Brewer that they used, pipe-frame bed, silver medallions in the wallpaper, and a view westward of the gas tanks by the edge of the river. They would walk over there after work and make love, with the late daylight coming level in the window. She was shy about him seeing her. She made him keep his eyes shut, and then, with a shiver, come as soon as he was in, her inside softly grainy, like a silk slipper. Outdoors it is growing dark and cool. He walks downhill. The day is gathering itself in. The mountain brings dusk early to the town. Now, just a few minutes after 6, a day before the vernal equinox, all the houses and factories and diagonal streets are in shadow. Pricked by an indefinite urgency, Rabbit turns, going left on Jackson Road, where he lived for 20 years. His parents' home is on the corner. He walks back as far as the lit kitchen window and steps onto the cement beneath, without the sole of his shoe scraping, and on tiptoe looks in one bright corner. He sees himself sitting in a high chair, and a quick, odd jealousy comes and passes. It is his son. The kid cries, "Peel! Peel!" This Rabbit can hear and understand. It means spill. Pop and Mim smile and make remarks, but Mom, mouth set, comes in grimly with her spoon. Harry's boy is being fed. He glides a pace backwards, and his acts take on a decisive haste. In darkness he goes down another block of Jackson, cuts up Joseph Street, runs a block, strides another, and comes within sight of his car, parked the wrong way on this side of the street, in front of his in-laws. Rabbit slithers in, closing the side door until metal touches metal, but not slamming it. The front of her parents' house is still unlit. He is delicate on the accelerator, and the motor is cold. It sticks and stalls. Rabbit's heart rises. But of course, what the hell if old lady Springer does come out? He can say he's on the way to pick up the kid. The Ford bucks away from the curb. He heads down Jackson to where it runs obliquely into Central, which is also the 422 to Philadelphia. He doesn't want to go to Philadelphia, but the only other choice is to go back through Mount Judge and into the thick of Brewer and the supper-time traffic. He doesn't intend ever to see Brewer again. The highway turns from 3-lane to 4-lane. Poor Janice would probably have the wind up now, on the phone to her mother or his mother, somebody, wondering why her supper was getting cold. So dumb. Forgive me. He accelerates. The growing complexity of lights threatens him. He wants to go south, down the map into orange groves and smoking rivers and barefoot women. It seems simple enough. Drive all night, through the dawn, through the morning, through the noon, park on a beach, take off your shoes and fall asleep by the Gulf of Mexico. Wake up with the stars above. But he is going east, the worst direction. The first road offered him, he turns right on. It works west through little tame country towns. Coventryville, Morgantown. Rabbit likes these. Spare, high farmhouses nuzzle the road. Soft chalk sides. On 222 he drives south. On the radio he hears Stagger Lee. Then, If I Didn't Care by Connie Francis. A commercial for big-screen Westinghouse TVs and the news. President Eisenhower and Prime Minister Harold Macmillan begin a series of talks in Gettysburg. Tibetans battle Chinese communists in Lhasa, and the whereabouts of the Dalai Lama are unknown. He picks up the 340 and crosses the Potomac River. Growing sleepy, he drives on through a thickening night. He turns off the radio. Yet into the silence that results, he refuses to let thoughts come. He doesn't want to think. He wants to fall asleep and wake up pillowed by sand. How stupid it was. How friggin' fucking stupid he was. Not to be further than this.
Only the lonely.
Toby Jones was reading Rabbit Run by John Updike. It was abridged by Eileen Horn, produced by Clive Brill, and was a Brill production for the BBC. In seeking advice about his marriage, Rabbit finds himself introduced to a
Only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
There are no signs. Rabbit puts the shift in neutral and pulls out the emergency brake and turns on the roof light and studies his map. His brain flutters with fatigue behind sandy eyelids. The time must be 12:30 or later. The highway in front of him is empty. He's forgotten the numbers of the routes he has taken and the names of the towns he has passed through. He wishes he had a cigarette to help him decide what his instinct is. The trip home is easier. He has broken through the barrier of fatigue and come into a calm, flat world where nothing matters much. The last quarter of a basketball game used to carry him into this world. You ran not as the crowd thought for the sake of the score, but for yourself in a kind of idleness. There was you, and sometimes the ball, and then the hole, the high, perfect hole, with its pretty skirt of net. He takes the Brewer turnoff off the pike, and the road takes him through the town. There is just a lavender touch of light in the air. Above the mountain, stars start to fade. He crosses the Running Horse Bridge and is among streets he knows. He drives around the mountain in company with a few hissing trailer trucks. Sunrise, an orange strip crushed against a far hill, flares between their wheels. He drives past his parents' house on Jackson and turns into Kedgerai's Alley and parks the car in front of the Sunshine Athletic Association, where his old coach, Marty Totherow, lives. Rabbit glances up hopefully at the third-story windows, but no light shows. Totherow, if he is in there, is still asleep. He lies back, covering himself with his suit coat, and his eyes close. A car purrs by, up the alley. He thinks again of his goal last night, lying down at dawn in sand by the Gulf of Mexico. And it seems in a way that the gritty seat of his car is that sand, and the rustling of the waking town, the rustling of the sea. He wonders where his son slept, what Janice has done, where his parents and her parents hunted when he didn't come home, whether the police know. He writhes and sits up, the covering coat falling to the car floor, and through the splotched windshield, there is Totherow, walking away down the alley. Rabbit jumps from the car and runs after him. Mr. Totherow! Mr. Totherow! His voice sounds flaky and rusty after hours of disuse. The man turns, looking stranger than Rabbit had expected. He looks like a big, tired dwarf. Rabbit fears he's made a mistake. But Totherow says the perfect thing. Harry, he says. Wonderful Harry Angstrom. He puts out his hand for Harry to seize, and with the other squeezes the boy's arm in a clasp of rigor. I need your advice, Rabbit says, and corrects himself. What I really need now is a place to sleep. What's happened to your home? Well, it kind of went. It was no good. I've run out. I really have. A pause. Rabbit narrows his eyes against the sunlight that rebounds off the asphalt. That doesn't sound like very mature behavior, Totherow says. My wife's an alcoholic. Did you drink with her? No, sir, never. I can't stand the stuff. I just don't like the taste. He says this readily, proud to be able to report to his old coach that he has not abused his body. Perhaps you should have, Totherow offers. Perhaps if you'd shared this pleasure with her, she could have controlled it. Rabbit can't follow this thought. It's Janice Springer, isn't it? Totherow asks. Yeah. God, is she dumb? She really is. Harry, that's a harsh thing to say of any human soul. Rabbit nods because Totherow seems certain of this. He suspects his old coach is addled. I thought maybe I could sleep a few hours here. Otherwise, I might as well go home. I've had it. To his relief, Totherow becomes all bustling action, taking his elbow, steering him back along the alley, saying, Yes, of course, Harry. You look terrible, Harry. Terrible. You asked me for two things, he continues. Two things. A place to sleep and advice. I'll give you the place to sleep, provided that when you wake up, we have a serious talk about this crisis in your marriage. I'll tell you now, it's not so much you I'm worried about. I know you well enough to know you always land on your feet, Harry. It's not so much you as Janice. She doesn't have your coordination. Do you promise? Promise we'll thresh out a way between us to help her. But I don't think I can. I mean, I'm not that interested in her. I mean, I was, but I'm not. They reach the entrance. Totherow opens the door with a key he has, saying, I don't believe it. I don't believe that my greatest boy would grow so hard-hearted. Hard-hearted. The word seems to clatter after them as they climb the stairs to the second floor. Rabbit apologizes. I'll try to think when I get some sleep. His dreams are shallow, furtive things. His legs switch. His lips move a little. The skins of his eyelids shudder as his eyeballs turn, surveying the inner wall of vision. Otherwise, he is as dead, beyond harm. "Harry, Harry, it's after 6 o'clock, says Tothero. Get up, Harry. You slept like a beautiful baby. We're going out. I've got a girl for you." "Why?" Rabbit meant to ask. "Where?" "We're going out to eat, Harry, to dine. D-I-N-E. Rise, my boy. Aren't you hungry? Hunger, hunger." He's a madman. Rabbit slides back the covers and holds himself in a sitting position. "What's this girl business?" "What is it? Yes, what is it? Cunt!" Tothero exclaims in a stream, and in the gray light his face falls. He seems amazed to hear himself say such an abrupt, ugly thing. He corrects himself. "No, I have an acquaintance in Brewer. A lady love, perhaps, whom I stand to a meal once in a blue moon. But it's nothing more than that. Harry, you're so innocent." I think I just better run along." "Oh, Harry, you and I are two of a kind." They go downstairs. In the car, he says sharply to his old coach, "So, you think I should have drunk with Janice?" "Do what the heart commands," Tothero says. "The heart is our only guide." Rabbit drives up the alley, coming to Potter Avenue. As the town thins, Tothero's tongue loosens. He talks of the ladies they will meet for dinner. "I guarantee you'll like my friend," he says, squirming around on the seat, crossing and uncrossing his legs. "She is a remarkable girl, Harry. I have no conception of what the other one will be like, but I know you'll be a gentleman." "What you said about Janice this morning, it kind of worries me." "Janice? Let's not talk about little mutts like Janice Springer, Harry boy. This is the night. This is no time for pity. The real women are dropping down out of the trees." With his hands, he imitates things falling out of trees. "Plip, plip, plippity!" Even discounting the man as a maniac, Rabbit becomes expectant. They park the car and go to meet two girls in front of a Chinese restaurant. Rabbit's heart thumps ahead of him down the pavement. They all come together, and Tothero introduces Margaret. "Margaret Costco, Harry Angstrom, my finest athlete. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce two such wonderful young people to one another." After Tothero's build-up, Rabbit is amazed that Margaret is just another Janice, the same sallow density, that stubborn smallness. Scarcely moving her lips, she says, "This is Ruth Leonard, Marty Tothero, and you, whatever your name is." "Harry," Rabbit says, or Rabbit. "That's right," Tothero cries. "The other boys used to call you Rabbit. I'd forgotten." "Well, you're a big bunny," Ruth remarks. She is fat, alongside Margaret, but not that fat. Chunky more, but tall, 5'8" or 9. She wears a green, silky dress and has flat blue eyes. Her hair, kind of a dirty ginger color, is bundled in a roll at the back of her head. "God, I'm hungry," Rabbit tells them all, just to say something. From somewhere he's got the jitters. Inside, they take a table and order. "What do you do?" Rabbit asks Ruth. "Nothing," Ruth answers, and her eyelids make a greasy blue curtain as she sips a daiquiri. Her chin takes something of the liquid's green light. The Chinese food arrives. Eager saliva fills his mouth. He hasn't had any since he was in the army in Texas. Margaret is in a special hurry to muddle hers with the glazed chunks. Their talk grows hearty. "He was the greatest coach in the county," Rabbit says of Tothero. "I would have been nothing without him." "No, Harry, no, girls. The first game he played, he scored 20 points. 23, Harry says. 23 points! Think of it! "We're going, by jingo," Tothero announces after a while, and tries to stand up. "Are you coming, my dear?" "Son of a bitch," Margaret says. Yet her little hard nut of a body slides over, and she glances behind her to see if she is leaving anything, cigarettes or a purse. "Where will you go?" Tothero asks Harry. I'll be fine. I have money. I'll get a hotel," Rabbit tells him. We'll talk sometime," Tothero promises, Margaret at his side. They go off together, looking from the back like father and daughter. "That girl is dumb," he says to Ruth. "Isn't she? Dumber than you can know. Look, I know. I'm married to her twin." "Ooh, married? Where is she?" "Probably with her parents. I just left her last night." "Oh, then this is just a holiday? You haven't left her?" The Chinese waiter brings a plate of sesame cakes and asks, "Gone for good, your friends?" It's okay. I'll pay." "Are you really going to a hotel?" Ruth asks. They both take several sesame cakes. "I guess. Don't live in a hotel," she says. I got to. Tell me a good one." He instinctively thinks she knows about hotels. "They're all expensive," she said. "Everything is. Just my little apartment a few blocks from here is expensive." "It's yours alone?" "Yeah, my girlfriend got married." She gazes into her glass, making reflected light run around the rim with a rocking motion of her hands. "What are you thinking?" he asks. "Just wondering." Right there, without moving his head, he feels the wind blow. So this is the drift. "Well, I'll tell you. Why don't you let me give you something towards your rent? 10? I need 15. Okay. The check comes. Rabbit pays, and beside the bill he puts a 10 and a 5 for Ruth. He stands up and takes her coat and holds it for her, and like a great green fish, his prize, she heaves up and across and out of the booth and coldly lets herself be fitted into it. "Thank you very much, sir. We thank you very much," the Chinese waiter says to him. With this Ruth, Rabbit enters the street.
Only the lonely, only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
Ruth turns left towards the shadow of Mount Judge, and Rabbit follows. He is light-hearted and skips once to get in step with this girl he adores. Her eyes are turned up to the stars above the mountain. "Hey," he says, "have you ever been up to the top there? When I was a kid, we used to walk up from the other side. The only time I ever got up there was in a car with some eager beaver." "Well, congratulations," he says, annoyed by the self-pity hiding in her toughness. "You know, you're a pig, really." He puts his arm around her and begs, "Come on now, be a pleasant cunt." He wants to prove to her that talking tough won't keep him off. "Here I am," she says. Her building is brick, like all the others on the west side of the street. Across the way, a big limestone church hangs like a gray curtain beside the street lamp. She lives one flight up. Rabbit stands behind her as she scratches her key in the lock. Abruptly, he begins to tremble, first his legs, and then the skin of his sides. Once inside, as she reaches for the light switch, he knocks her arm down, pulls her around, and kisses her. It's insanity. He wants to crush her. There is no love in it. By nature, in such an embrace, she fights back. When she can get her hand free, she fits her palm against his jaw and pushes as if she wanted to throw his skull back into the hall. Her fingers curl, and a long nail scrapes the tender skin below one eye. He lets her go. "Get out," she says, her chunky, mussed face ugly in the light from the hall. He kicks the door shut with a backward flip of his leg. "You all think you're such lovers." "I am," he assures her. "I am a lover." And on a wave of alcohol and stirred semen, he steps forward in a kind of swoon. Though she backs away, it is not so quickly that he cannot feel her socket of fear healing. The room they are in is small, and 2 armchairs and a sofa bed furnish it. She walks to the next room, a little larger, holding a double bed. "All right," she says, "you can get into that. Where are you going? You're gonna undress in there?" "Yeah." "Don't. Let me undress you, please." In his concern, he has come to stand beside her and touches her arm now. She moves her arm from under his touch. "You're pretty bossy. Please, please." She moves with stiff shyness, puzzled by his will. Trembling again, he brings her to a stop by the foot of the bed and searches for the catch of her dress. "Let me do it. Don't be in such a hurry. I'll do it." "Well, then undress me and stop farting around." He sighs through his nose. "You have a sweet tongue. I'm sorry if I shock you." Yet in her voice is a small metallic withdrawal, as if she really is. "You don't," he says, and businesslike stoops and takes the hem of her dress in his hands. He peels it up her body, and she lifts her arms, and her head gets caught for a moment in the neck hole. She shakes her head crossly, like a dog with a scrap, and the dress comes free. He sails it into a chair, hulking in the corner. "God, you're pretty." She's a ghost in her silver slip. "Yeah," she says, "pretty plump." In the space of a breath, he goes to her and picks her up and carries her to the bed and lays her on it. So pretty. Cupping a hand behind her hot neck, he pulls her up and slides her slip over her head. It comes off with liquid ease. Clothes just fall from a woman who wants to be stripped. She shrugs her bra straps off. He moves away and sits on the corner of the bed and drinks in the pure sight of her. Her belly is a pond of shadow, deepening to a black, eclipsed by the inner swell of her thighs. "What about you?" she asks. He is still dressed, even to his necktie. While he is draping his trousers over a chair, she slips beneath the covers. He stands over her in his underclothes, and Ruth laughs. "What's the joke?" "In those damned underclothes, you do look kind of like a rabbit. I thought only kids wore those elastic kind of pants." He looks down at his t-shirt and snug underpants, pleased and further stirred. His name in her mouth feels like a physical touch. He peels out of his underclothes, bobs, and hurries to hide in the bed, in the long, dark space between the sheets. He makes love to her as he would to his wife. After their marriage, Janice needed coaxing. He would begin by rubbing her back. Ruth submits warily when he tells her to lie on her stomach. He sits up on her cushiony buttocks and leans his weight down into his thumbs and palms as they work the broad muscles and insistent bones. She sighs and shifts her head on the pillow. "You should be in the Turkish bath business," she says. He works until his wrists ache and flops from astride his mermaid, truly weary, as if under a sea spell, to sleep. He pulls the cover up over them to the middle of their faces. His lids flutter shut, though she arches anxiously against him. Her hand seeks him and angles him earnestly for a touch. His sealed lids feel as red. She sees blue when with one deliberate hand she pries open his jaw and bows his head to her burdened chest. Lovely, wobbly bubbles, heavy perfume between. She rolls away onto her back, the precious red touch breaking, twists, giving him cool new skin. She forces the dry other breast into his face. His hand, abandoned on the breadth of her body, finds at arm's length a split pod, an open fold, shapeless and simple. "Now?" Ruth asks, her voice croaky. He kneels in a kind of sickness between her spread legs. With her help, their blind loins fit. Something sad in the capture. The capture grows. He braces himself on his arms above her, afraid, for it is here he most often failed Janice by coming too soon. Yet his love is slow to burst in her warmth. With thin, thin arms, she hugs him and presses him down and rises above him. From her high, smooth shoulders down, she is one long underbelly, erect and light above him. He says in praise, softly, "Hey." She answers, "Hey, you're pretty. Come on, work." Galled, he shoves up through her, and in addition sets his hand under her jaw, and shoves her face so his fingers slip into her mouth, and her slippery throat strains. As if unstrung by this, she tumbles and carries him over, and he lies on top of her again, the skin of their chests sticking together. She reaches down and touches their mixed fur, and her breathing snags on something sharp. She feels transparent. He sees her heart. So she is first, and waits for him, while at a trembling extremity of tenderness he traces again and again her eyebrow with his thumb. His sea of seed buckles and sobs into a still channel. At each shudder, her mouth smiles in his, and her legs, locked at his back, bear down. She asks in time, "Okay." Ruth takes her legs from around him and spills him off her body like a pile of sand. "I had forgotten," she says. "Forgot what?" "That I could have it too." "What's it like?" "Oh, it's like falling through." "Where do you fall to?" "Nowhere. I can't talk about it." In the morning, church bells ring loudly. Ruth is getting dressed. "Sunday morning," she says. "I could throw up every Sunday morning." "Why?" She just says, as if he knows the answer. "You don't believe anything?" he asks. "No. You mean you do?" "Well, yeah, I think so." "Well, if you do, what are you doing here?" she asks. "Why not? You think you're Satan or somebody?" This stops her a moment before she laughs. "Well, you go right ahead if it makes you happy." This and her turning, hair swirling, to say it, stir him. "Come here," he asks. The idea of making it while the churches are full excites him. "No," Ruth says. She is really a little sore. His belief in God grates against her. "Get out of my bed." "What? Leave you all alone?" He says this as with comical speed while she stands there startled. He jumps from the bed and gathers up some of his clothes and ducks into the bathroom and closes the door. When he comes out, in underclothes, he says, still clowning, "You don't like me any more?" and moves, pouting, to where his trousers are neatly laid on the chair. "I like you enough," she says, tugging the bedspread smooth. "Hey, I'll tell you what," Rabbit says. "I'll run out and get some stuff at the grocery store. You can cook for our lunch." "Say, you settle right in, don't you?" "Why? Were you going to meet somebody?" "No, I don't have anybody today." What shall I get?" "What do you like?" she asks. He leaves for the store, pleased. The thing about her is she's good-natured. In all the green world, nothing feels as good as a woman's good nature. The pavement kicks under his feet as he runs to the grocery store in his dirty shirt. What do you like? He has her. He knows he has her. After lunch on hot dogs and relish, French fries and 3 slices of Ma Schweitzer's shoe-fly pie, he makes a plan. He explains to Ruth, "You see, my wife's old man is a used car dealer, and when we got married, he sold us this car at a pretty big discount. So in a way, it's really my wife's car, and anyway, since she has the kid, I think she ought to have it. And then my shirt's dirty, and I ought to get my clothes if I can. So I thought, why don't I sneak over to my place now and leave the car and pick up my clothes? Suppose she's there. She won't be. She'll be at her mother's." She asks, "What do you think you're going to do with these clothes?" He admits, "Bring them here." She takes in a breath but comes out with nothing. "Just for tonight," he pleads. You're not doing anything, are you?" "Maybe. I don't know. Probably not." "Well then, great. Hey, I love you." She shakes her head heavily and says, "You're bad news." Across from him, her broad pelvis, snug in a nubbly brown skirt, is solid and symmetrical as the base of a powerful column. His heart rises through that strong column, and, enraptured to feel his love for her founded anew, yet not daring to lift his eyes to the test of her face, he says, "I can't help it. You're such good news."
Only the lonely. Only the lonely. Know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely. Know this feeling ain't right.
Though the apartment is empty, it is yet so full of Janice that he begins to tremble. The sight of that easy chair turned to face the television attacks his knees. Nelson's broken toys on the floor derange his head. Rabbit puts the door key and the car keys on top of the television case. In frightened haste, he goes to the bedroom and takes clean jockey pants, T-shirts, and socks from a drawer, 3 shirts in cellophane and blue cardboard from another, draws his 2 suits and a sport shirt from the closet, and wraps the smaller clothing in the suits to form a bundle he can carry. The job makes him sweat. He's glad to get out. The door snaps shut behind him irrevocably. He hurries. His feet patter. His name on the mailbox seems to call to him as he sweeps past. Its letters of blue ink crowd the air like a cry. A gray car goes by, too slowly. With a dismay that makes the bundle of clothes double its weight in his arms, Rabbit realizes who it is, though he doesn't know his name. The Episcopalian minister. His in-laws were Episcopalians. Rabbit doesn't quite run. The downhill pavement jars his heels at every stride. If he can just make the alley. Behind his ear, a childishly twanging voice pipes, "I beg your pardon, are you Harry Angstrom?" With a falling sensation, Rabbit turns and half whispers, "Yes." The fair young man, with his throat manacled in white, lets his car glide against the curb. "Well, I'm Jack Eccles," he says. He gets out of his car and offers his hand. To accept it, Rabbit has to put down his big ball of clothes in the strip of grass between pavement and curb. He feels caught, senses tenacity in his captor. Eccles slaps the breast of his coat. "Do you have a match by any chance?" "Gee, I'm sorry, no, I quit smoking." "Well, you're a better man than I am." He pauses and thinks. "Can I give you a lift anywhere?" "No, hell, don't bother." "I'd like to talk to you." "Yeah, okay. This is about Janice?" Eccles nods, staring out the rear window as he backs away from the curb. He is about Rabbit's age or a little older. There are scoops of weary violet below his eyes. "She seems much saner today. She and her father came to church this morning." They drive down the street. Eccles pokes the lighter in on the dashboard. Rabbit is getting annoyed at the way the minister isn't bawling him out or something. He doesn't even seem to know his job. What exactly is your plan? I don't really have a plan. I'm sort of playing it by ear. Eccles asks, what did she do that made you leave? I don't know, says Rabbit. It just seemed like I was glued in with a lot of busted toys and empty glasses, and the television going, and meals later or never, and no way of getting out. And then all of a sudden it hit me, how easy it was to get out, just walk out, and by damn it was easy. For less than 2 days it's been. It's been strange, too. Rather than try to describe the strangeness, he asks, what's Janice gonna do, do you think? She doesn't know. She seems almost paralyzed. She doesn't want anyone to do anything. Poor kid. She's such a mutt. Eccles continues. You speak of this feeling of muddle. What do you think it's like for other young couples? In what way do you think you're exceptional? You don't think that there's any answer to that, but there is. I played first-rate basketball. I really did. And if you're first-rate at something, no matter what, it takes the kick out of being second-rate. And that little thing Janice and I had going, boy, it was really second-rate. They've come down into the outskirts of Brewer. Eccles asks, do you believe in God? Rabbit answers without hesitation, yes. Eccles blinks in surprise. Do you think, then, that God wants you to make your wife suffer? With a trace of boyish bad temper, Eccles pulls over and stops in front of a fire hydrant. As he brakes racily, something clatters in the trunk. My golf clubs. You play? Could I invite you for a game? Ah, here's the hook. Rabbit gets out, hugging his great ball of clothes, and sidesteps, clowning in his freedom. I don't have clubs. Well, they're easy to rent. Tuesday? Tuesday at 2? Shall I pick you up? Rabbit knows he should run, but the thought of a game, and an idea that it's safest to see the hunter, make resistance. No, I'll come to your home. Promise? Yeah, but don't trust a promise from me. I have to. Eccles names an address in Mount Judge, and they call goodbye at the curb. Ruth lets him in, a pocket mystery in her hand. Her eyes look sleepy from reading. She is tepid and solid in his embrace. Not friendly, not. As he hangs up his suits, Ruth asks, You give your wife the car? There was nobody there. I snuck in and out, left the key. And nobody caught you? As a matter of fact, somebody did. The Episcopalian minister gave me a ride back into Brewer. What did he say? Nothing much. Come on, he says. Put on flat shoes and let's go for a walk. I'll have to wear heels. They're all I have. They approach the mountain through the city park. He takes Ruth's hand. Trees darken. Pavilions slide downhill. Long ago, when hiking was customary entertainment, the city built stairs up the Brewer side of the mountain. They are made of 6-foot tarred logs, with dirt filled in flat between them. The footing is difficult for Ruth. Near the top, Ruth and Rabbit watch the city slowly flatten under them. Rails guard the cliff edge. He grips one white beam and looks straight down into the exploding heads of trees. What is he doing here, standing on air? Why isn't he home? He becomes frightened and begs Ruth, Put your arms around me. She carelessly obliges. He clasps her tighter and feels better. Brewer at their feet seems to warm in the sloping sunlight. So it is a return of security that he asks, voicing like a loved child, a teasing doubt. Were you really a whore? Her eyes narrow. Her chin changes shape. She twists away. Are you really a rat? He feels the need of care in his answer. In a way. All right, then. They take a bus down. Tuesday afternoon, overcast. He takes a bus to Mount Judge to meet the minister. They go to play golf in Eccles' car. Under the threat of rain, the skin of the Buick has a greasy waxiness. Eccles lights a cigarette as they go across Route 422 into the valley toward the golf course. "So your trouble isn't really lack of religion," he says. "Huh? I was remembering our other conversation. You said you know what's inside you. I've been wondering all weekend what that was. Can you tell me?" Rabbit doesn't want to tell him anything. The more he tells, the more he loses. He's safe inside his own skin. He doesn't want to come out. But the fierce convention of courtesy pries open his lips. "I do feel, I guess, that somewhere behind all this," he gestures outward at the unremarkable scenery, "there's something that wants me to find it." Eccles taps out his cigarette carefully. "Of course, all vagrants think they're on a quest, at first." Rabbit doesn't see that he deserved this slap. He says, "Well, I guess that makes your friend Jesus look pretty foolish." They turn off the road and go up the winding drives to the clubhouse. Eccles parks the long Buick on the asphalt and says, "Before I forget." Rabbit's hand is on the door handle. "What?" "Do you want a job? You're not going back to your five and dime work, I take it. A parishioner of mine, a Mrs. Horace Smith, has about 8 acres of garden around her home, towards Appleboro. I don't know beans about gardening. Nobody does. That's what Mrs. Smith says. $40 a week. $1 an hour? I can't. I may not even stay in the county. Is the girl going to kick you out? Ruth? Ruth Leonard? Well, aren't you smart?" Who could have told him? It doesn't matter. The world's such a web anyway. Things just tremble through. "I never heard of her," Rabbit says. Down in the pagan groves and green alleys of the golf course, Eccles is transformed. A brainless gaiety animates him. He laughs and swings and clucks and calls. Harry stops hating him. He skids into puddles, is swallowed by trees, infallibly sinks into the mangy scruff at the sides of the fairways. Nightmare is the word. His unreal hacking dazes his brain. In his head, he's talking to the clubs as if they're women. The irons, light and thin, yet somehow treacherous in his hands, are Janice. So dumb, really dumb. Screw her. Just screw her. Walking towards Eccles, he says, You never did tell me how Janice is doing." "Janice? She seemed in good spirits on Monday. You must realize that for a little while she'll probably enjoy being back with her parents. It's her own version of your irresponsibility. Actually, she can't stand her parents any more than I can." His putt slides past on the downside and goes 2 or 3 fucking feet too far. 4 feet. Fuck. "Harry," Eccles asks, sweetly yet boldly, "why have you left her? You're obviously deeply involved with her." "I told you. There was this thing that wasn't there." "What thing? Have you ever seen it? Are you sure it exists?" "I tell you, I know what it is." "Is it blue? Is it red? Does it have polka dots?" "The truth is," Eccles tells him with womanish excitement, "you're monstrously selfish. You're a coward. You worship nothing except your own worst instincts." They reach the tee, a platform of turf beside a hunchbacked fruit tree. "Let me go first," Rabbit says, "till you calm down." His heart is hushed by anger. He doesn't care about anything except getting out of this tangle. Very simply, he brings the club head around his shoulder into the ball. The sound has a hollowness he hasn't heard before. His arms force his head up, and his ball is hung way out, lunarly pale against the beautiful black blue of storm clouds. It recedes along a line straight as a ruler edge. It hesitates, and Rabbit thinks it will die, but he's fooled. For the ball makes a final leap. With a kind of visible sob, it takes a last bite of space before vanishing in falling. "That's it!" he cries, and turning to Eccles with a grin of aggrandizement, repeats, "That's it!"
Only the lonely, only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
"You have it pretty good, don't you?" Ruth asks him. They have gone on the afternoon of this Memorial Day to the public swimming pool in West Brewster. She was self-conscious about getting into a bathing suit, but in fact when she came out she looked great. Her head made small by the bathing cap, and her shoulders round and wide. She swam easily, her big legs kicking slowly, and her clean arms lifting, and her back and bottom shimmering black under the jiggled green. Once she stopped and floated, putting her face down in the water in a motion that quickened his heart with its slight danger. He knew her as well as the water, like the water that had been everywhere on her body. Ruth climbs the little ladder, shedding water in great pale green grape bunches. He scrambles back to their blanket so that when she comes over, he sees her standing above him, straddling the sky. The black hair high on the insides of her thighs, pasted into swirls by the water. She lies down beside him and closes her eyes and submits to the sun. "You have it pretty good," she says. "How so?" "Look at all you've got. You've got Eccles to play golf with every week and to keep your wife from doing anything to you. You've got your job tending flowers and old Mrs. Smith in love with you for it. You've got me." He gets up on an elbow and looks across her dead body to the lighter figures of two 16-year-olds, sipping orange crush from cardboard cones. The one in a white strapless peeks up at him from sucking her straw with a brown glance, her skinny legs dark as a Negro's. "Oh, all the world loves you," Ruth said suddenly. "What I wonder is, why?" "I'm lovable," he says. "I mean, why the hell you? What's so special about you?" "I give people faith." Eccles has told him this. Once, with a laugh, probably meaning it sarcastically. You never knew what Eccles was really meaning. "You give me a pain," Ruth says. Well, I'll be damned. The injustice. After he was so proud of her in the pool, loved her so much. "What's your kick? I support you." "The hell you do. I have a job." It's true. A little after he went to work in Mrs. Smith's garden, Ruth got a job as a stenographer with an insurance company that has a branch in Brewer. He wanted her to. He was nervous about how she would spend her afternoons with him away. She said she'd never enjoyed turning tricks. He wasn't so sure. She wasn't exactly suffering when he met her. "Quit it," he says. "I'll support you." "You'll support me. If you're so big, why don't you support your wife?" "Why should I? Her father's rolling in it." "You're so smug, is what gets me. Don't you ever think you're going to have to pay a price?" She looks at him now, squarely, with eyes bloodshot from being in the water. Then she turns her head away, quickly, to keep down the tears, thinking, that's one of the signs, crying easily. God. At work, she has to get up from the typewriter and rush into the John like she has the runs and sob, sob, sob. And hungry. A cream soda with her sandwich and a donut with her coffee, and still she has to buy a candy bar at the cash register. After she's been trying to slim down for him and had lost 6 pounds, at least one scale said. That was what was rich. Changing herself in one direction for him, when in his stupidity he was changing her in just the other. Rabbit. She wonders what he has. He's beautiful for a man, soft and uncircumcised, lying sideways in his fleece, and then, like an angel's horn, he fits her tight. But it must be more than that. And it isn't just him being so boyish and bringing her bongo drums and saying sweet, grateful things because he has a funny power over her, too. When they're good together, she feels like next to nothing with him. And that must be it. That must be what she was looking for. To feel like next to nothing with a man. Boy, that first night, when he said that so sort of proudly. Hey. She forgave all men then. His face, all their faces, gathered into a scared blur, and it felt like she was falling under to something better than she was. But then, after all, it turns out he's not so different. Hanging on you, all depressed and lovely, and then when he's had it, turning his back to think of something else. Sometimes she just wants to push him off and shake him and shout, "I can't, you dope. Don't you know you're a father?" She mustn't tell him. Saying the word would make it final. It's just been one period, and the next is coming up in a day, and maybe she'll have it, and then she won't have anything. As much of a mess as it is, she doesn't know how happy that would make her, really. God, she isn't even sure she doesn't want it, because he wants it from the way he acts. That was the thing about him. He just lived in his skin and didn't give a thought to the consequences of anything. Now he answers her question with an idle, remote smugness that infuriates her. So the tears do come. "I'll tell you," he says. "When I ran from Janice, I made an interesting discovery." The tears bubble over her lids. "If you have the guts to be yourself," he says, "other people will pay your price." That night, they go to Club Castanet for some drinks with her friend, Margaret. It's in the south side of Brewer, where Warren Avenue crosses Running Horse Street at an acute angle. Anything for a little change. Rabbit is bored. He and Ruth sit at a booth near the front, where they get through the window a faint fluctuation of red light as the neon castanet on the sign outside flickers back and forth. This pink tremor takes the weight off Ruth's face. She sits across from him. A colored girl in an orange uniform brings them daiquiris, then saunters away, swinging her orange frills. She doesn't care about him. He likes that she doesn't care. The thing about Ruth is, lately she's been trying to make him feel guilty about something. Somehow the ease has gone out of things. The door opens and Margaret comes in with the chill. On top of everything, the guy with her he isn't happy to see. Ronnie Harrison. "Hell," Harrison says. "It's the great Angstrom. I've been hearing about you." He ducks down to sit beside Ruth. "Hearing what?" "Oh, the word." Harrison was never one of Rabbit's favorites in the locker room and has not improved. He is now fat and half bald. He is wearing a seersucker suit, and its cool air of business success annoys Rabbit. He feels hemmed in. "How's life treating the old master?" Harrison says. "The word is you've got it made." His eyes make his meaning by flicking sideways to Ruth, who sits there like a lump. "He made me," she says. "He and who else?" Ruth giggles. Damn her. Harrison bends his head towards Ruth's, pink bald spot showing, and whispers a remark. Her lips tuck up in a smile. Rabbit sits across from them, feeling married to this girl he hates. "Dear Ruth," Harrison says loudly, "how have you been? I often worry about you." "Don't worry about me," she says, yet seems pleased. "I just wonder," he goes on, "about the ability of our mutual friend to support you in the style to which you are accustomed." The negress brings more drinks, and Harrison, as if flashing a badge, shows her the lizard skin Ronson lighter in his hand. "Real skin," he says. The the waitress says, with lots of throat. Your own? Rabbit laughs. He loves that black chick. When she goes, Harrison leans forward with a sweet smile you use on children. Did you know, he asks Harry, that Ruth and I once went to Atlantic City together? There was another couple, she hastily tells Harry. Rabbit blinks. He doesn't really know what to do about this awful guy. And just there, in the space of blinking, with the alcohol vaporizing under his ribs, he feels himself pass over. They can all go to hell. Come on, Ruth, he says. Get on your motorcycle. She protests. I'm happy. Come on. She moves to collect her things. It annoys him that she is too dumb to see he's really sore. He's angry about so many things he doesn't know where to begin. So, you and that bastard went to Atlantic City together. They are walking up Warren Avenue. People are sitting out on their steps in the warm spring air. They fight to keep their voices low. You've laid for Harrison, haven't you? I guess, sure. You guess? You don't know? I said, sure. And how many others? I don't know. They're all the same to you. Is that it? No, they're not. But I don't see what the count matters. You knew what I was. Did you blow, guys? Look, maybe we should just say bye-bye. At the thought of that, her eyes burn, and she hates him too much to think of sharing her secret with him. Her secret, inside her, seems to have no relation to him, this big body loping along with her, hungry as a ghost. With degrading gratitude, she hears him say, No, I don't want to say bye-bye. I just want an answer to my question. The answer to your question is yes. Well, would you do everything to me that you did to him? This stuns her skin in a curious way. Her body feels squeezed and sickened inside it. Sure, if you want me to. After being a wife, a whore's skin feels tight. His relief is boyish. His front teeth flash happily. Just once, he promises. Honest. I'll never ask you again. He tries to put his arm around her, but she pulls away. Up in the apartment, he asks plaintively, Are you going to? She is struck by the helplessness of his posture. Sucking you off in cold blood? You just want it? Uh-huh. Is it so awful for you? This glimmer of her gentle rabbit emboldens her. May I ask what I've done? I didn't like the way you acted tonight. It's pretty cute. You just want it, really? Maybe I think it would be nice. Look, I've loved you. Well, I've loved you. And now? I don't know. I want to, still. Now those damn tears again. That's good of you. That's heroic. I need you on your knees. I need you to do it. It'd prove you're mine. Shall I take my clothes off? He says. Sure. He takes them off quickly and neatly and stands by the dull wall in his brilliant body. His whole shy pose has these wings of tension, like he's an angel waiting for a word. Sliding her last clothes off, her arms feel cold, touching her sides. This month, she's felt cold all the time, her temperature being divided or something. In the growing light, he shifts slightly. She closes her eyes and tells herself, they're not ugly. Not.
Only the lonely. Only the lonely. I know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely. Know this feeling ain't right.
Mrs. Springer called the rectory a little after 8. Mrs. Eccles told her Jack had taken the young people's softball team to a game 15 miles away, and she didn't know when he'd be home. Mrs. Springer's panic carried over the wire, and Lucy spent nearly 2 hours calling numbers in an attempt to reach him. When her husband does come in at 11:15, it turns out he's been sitting in a drugstore gossiping with some of his teenagers. So he comes in titillated, silly with how far can you go on dates and still love Jesus. Eccles sees at once she is furious. Lucy delivers her message as sufficient rebuke, but it fails for that. For with hardly a backward glance at the horrid evening she has spent, Eccles rushes to the phone. "Hello? Is that you, Harry? Were you asleep?" "In a way." "Harry, your wife has started to have the baby. Her mother called here around 8 and I just got in." Eccles closes his eyes. In the dark, tipping silence, he feels his ministry, sum and substance, being judged. "Yeah," the other breathes in the far corner of the darkness. I guess I ought to go to her." "I wish you would." "I guess I should. It's mine. Too." "Exactly. It's St. Joseph's in Brewer. You know where that is." "Yeah, sure. I can walk it in 10 minutes. You want me to pick you up in the car?" "No, I'll walk it." "All right, if you prefer." "Harry." "Huh?" "I'm very proud of you." Eccles had reached for him, it felt like, out of the ground. Ruth's bedroom is dim. The street lamp, like a low moon, burns shadows into the inner planes of the armchair, the burdened bed. His body, his whole frame, tingles, as if with the shaking of small bells hung up and down his silver skin. He wonders if he had been asleep, and how long, 10 minutes or 5 hours. He finds his underclothes and trousers draped on a chair and fumbles with them. "Hey, baby." The long lump under the covers doesn't answer. He doesn't feel Ruth is asleep. When she is asleep, her breathing is noisier. "Hey, I gotta go out." No answer. "My wife's having her baby. I gotta go see her through it. I'll be back in a couple of hours. I love you." Still, the body under the covers and the frizzy crescent of hair peeking over the top edge of the blanket don't move. "Ruth, I gotta go this once. It's my baby she's having, and she's such a mutt I don't think she can do it by herself. Our first one came awfully hard. It's the least I owe her." Probably this wasn't the best way to say it, but he's trying to explain, and her stillness frightens him and is beginning to make him sore. "Ruth, if you don't say anything, I'm not coming back. Ruth?" She lies there, like some dead animal. He puts on his shirt and doesn't bother with a coat and necktie. When the door closes, the taste of seawater in her mouth is swallowed by the thick grief that mounts in her throat, so fully she has to sit up to breathe. Tears slide from her blind eyes and salt the corners of her mouth as the empty walls of the room become real and then dense. She had known from the first night that the wife would win. They have the hooks, and anyway, she feels really lousy. A wave of wanting to throw up comes over her. She goes to the john and kneels on the tiles and watches the still oval of water in the toilet, as if it's going to do something. She doesn't think after all she has it in her to throw up, but stays there because it pleases her, her bare arm resting on the icy porcelain lip. In her faint state, it comes to seem that this thing that's making her sick is some kind of friend. He runs most of the way to the hospital. The St. Joseph's parking lot is a striped asphalt square whose sides are lined with city trees, and above their tops, in this hard, open space, he sees the moon, and for a second stops and communes with its mournful face. Stops, stark, on his small, scrabbled shadow on the asphalt, to look up toward the heavenly stone that mirrors the stone that has risen inside his hot skin. Make it be all right, he prays to it, and goes in the rear entrance. The hospital light is bright and blue and shadowless. He walks down a linoleum hall perfumed with ether to the front desk. "Angstrom," he tells the nun behind the typewriter, "I think my wife is here." "You may wait over there." She points with a pink ballpoint pen. Eccles comes in, blinking and scrawny in his collar. He greets the sister behind the desk by name, Sister Bernard. Rabbit stands up on ankles of air, and Eccles comes over with that familiar frown in his eyebrows. Rabbit asks, "Does she know I'm here?" He wouldn't have predicted that he would whisper. He hates the panic choke in his voice. "I'll see that she's told, if she's still conscious," Eccles says in a loud voice that makes the whispering men look up. He goes over to Sister Bernard. Rabbit pulls a magazine off the table, the Saturday Evening Post. His mind can't keep with the words, but keeps skidding up and branching away and flowering into little visions of Janice screaming, of the baby's head blooming out of blood, of the surgeon's red rubber hands and gauze face, and Janice's babyish black nostrils widening to take in the antiseptic smell, the smell running everywhere along the white walls, of their having been washed, of blood being washed, and shit washed and retching, washed until every surface smells like the inside of a bucket. He is certain that as a consequence of his sin, Janice or the baby will die. His sin, a conglomerate of flight, cruelty, obscenity, and conceit, a black clot embodied in the entrails of the birth. On the extreme edge of his tree of fear, Eccles perches, blackbird, flipping the pages of magazines and making frowning faces to himself. He seems unreal to Rabbit. Everything seems unreal that is outside of his sensations. His palms tingle, his armpits itch the way they used to when he was little and late for school, running up Jackson Road. He turns to Eccles. "Say, don't you want to go home? What time is it?" "Around 2. I'd like to stay, if I may." "Well, I won't run off, if that's what you're afraid of." Eccles laughs and keeps on sitting there. "When she had Nelson, the poor kid was at it for 12 hours. Eccles says, "The second child is usually easier." Events create events. Mrs. Springer, Janice's mother, passes through from the privileged room where she has been waiting and stiffly nods at Eccles. Seeing Harry in the corner of her eye makes her stumble. Eccles gets up and goes with her to the outside. After a while, the two of them come back with Mr. Springer, who wears a tiny knotted necktie and a laundry-fresh shirt. He says, "Hello, Harry." This acknowledgment goads the fat hag into turning on Harry and telling him, "If you're sitting there like a buzzard, young man, hoping she's going to die, you might as well go back to where you've been living, because she's doing fine without you." The two men hustle her away. His mother-in-law's attack, though it ached to hurt him, is the first thing anybody has said to Harry since this began that seems to fit the enormity of the event going on somewhere behind the screen of the hospital soap smell. Mr. Springer returns and passes through to the outside again, bestowing on Rabbit a painfully complex smile, compounded of a wish to apologize for his wife — we're both men, I know — a wish to keep distant, nevertheless you've behaved unforgivably, and the car salesman's reflex of politeness. Harry thinks, but does not say, "You crumb, you slave." Now a doctor with a barrel chest and skinned-looking hands comes into the anteroom uncertainly. "Mr. Angstrom? I'm Dr. Crow." Harry has never met him, but Janice used to visit him once a month and bring home tales of how gentle he was, how he seemed to know exactly what it was like to be a pregnant woman. "Congratulations. You have a beautiful little daughter." He offers his hand so hastily, Harry has only time partly to rise, and thus absorbs the news in a crouching position. "I do? It's okay?" 6 pounds, 10 ounces. Your wife was conscious throughout and held the baby for a minute after a normal delivery. Really? That's wonderful. Thank you. Good grief. Thank you. Crow's gaze contains not even a reprimand. He seems to see Harry as just another in the parade of more or less dutiful husbands whose brainlessly sown seeds he spends his life trying to harvest. Harry asks, "Can I see her?" "Who?" My wife." "Oh, of course, surely. I thought you meant the baby. I'd rather you waited until visiting hours tomorrow for that. There's not a nurse to show her right now." When they lead him into her room, Janice is lying between two smooth sheets on a high metal bed. She turns her face and says, "Well, look who it isn't." "Hey," he says, and goes over to kiss her. He bends as you would to a glass flower. To his surprise, her arms come out from the sheets, and she puts them around his head and presses his face down into her soft, happy, swimming mouth. "I wanted to see you," she says. "Why, baby, after I've been so crummy?" "No, you haven't. They told me you were here, and all the while I was thinking then it was your baby, and it was like I was having you. I'm so full of ether, it's just like I'm floating, Harry. I could just talk and talk." She puts her hands on her stomach and closes her eyes and smiles. "Did we want a girl? Say we did." "I did." He discovers this is true, though the words discover the desire. "How is Nelson?" "Every day he says, 'Daddy home day,' until I could belt him. Poor saint." "Oh, damn," he says, and his own tears sting the bridge of his nose. "I don't know why I left." A nun fills the doorway with her wings. "Mr. Angstrom, time." "Come, kiss," Janice says. She touches his face as he bends. "Don't leave," she says. "Just for now. I'll be back tomorrow. Love you. Listen, I love you." Waiting for him in the anteroom, Eccles asks, "How was she?" "Terrific. Are you going to go back now to, where you were?" "No," Rabbit answers, horrified. "For heaven's sake, I can't." "Well then, would you like to come home with me?" No, really, I couldn't put you to the trouble." He has already made up his mind to accept. Every bone in his body feels slack. "It's no trouble. We have scads of room." Okay, I mean, good. Thanks."
Only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
A woman's voice is tapping at the door. "Mr. Angstrom? It's 12:20. Jack told me to tell you the visiting hours at the hospital are 1 to 3. He recognizes Eccles's wife, Lucy's, crisp little twitty tone. Eccles is at church. She gives him Cheerios and milk for breakfast. "Thank you very much," he says, tucking in his shirt tail. "You're very welcome," Lucy says. "Be good now." He tries to calculate how much sarcasm there is in that. They stand at the front door, he and Eccles' pretty, freckle-faced wife. As he looks up from Lucy's painted toenails to her face, an amazing thing enters the silence. The woman winks, quick as a light. Maybe he imagined it. He turns the knob and retreats down the sunny walk. At the hospital, they say Janice has the baby with her for a moment, and could he please wait. He is leafing through a magazine backwards when a tall woman with back-swept gray hair and finely wrinkled skin comes in, and looks so familiar he stares. She sees this and has to speak. "You're an old student of Marty's. I'm Harriet Totherow. We had you to dinner once. I can almost think of your name. Harry stands up. I'm Harry Angstrom, he says. Yes, that's your name. He was so proud of you. He often talked to me about you, even recently. I've heard he was sick. Yes, he is, Harry. Quite sick. He had 2 strokes, once since he came into the hospital. He's here? Yes. Would you like to visit him? I know it would make him very happy. For just a moment. I'd like to see him, sure. Tothero is in a room alone. Like waiting presences, white curtains hang expectantly around the head of his bed. Dear, I've brought you someone. He was waiting outside in the most miraculous way. Hello, Mr. Tothero. My wife's had her baby. He goes towards the bed with blank momentum. The sight of the old man lying there, shrunken, his tongue sliding in his lopsided mouth, has stunned him. Rabbit offers his hand. He can't lift his arms, Harry, Mrs. Tothero says. He's helpless, but talk to him. He can see and hear. Harry sinks into the bedside chair. His old coach's eyeballs shift with scattered quickness as he turns his head an inch toward the visitor. Talk. He must talk. It's a little girl. I want to thank you, he speaks loudly, for the help you gave in getting me and Janice back together again. You were very kind. Tothero retracts his tongue and shifts his face to look at his wife. His chin crinkles as he tries to say something. I'm straightened out now, Mr. Tothero, and I hope you're up and out of this bed soon. He feels claustrophobic, as if he's inside Tothero's skull. When he stands up, he has the fear he will bump his head, though the white ceiling is far away. I'd better go down and visit my wife. She just had the baby last night. It's a girl. Thank you very much, Harry. I know he's enjoyed seeing you, Mrs. Tothero says. He walks down the hall springingly, dismissed. His health, his reformed life, make space, even the antiseptic space of the hospital corridors, delicious. Yet his visit with Janice is disappointing. Perhaps he is still choked by seeing poor Tothero stretched out as good as dead. Perhaps, out of ether, Janice is choked by thinking how he's treated her. She complains a lot about how much her stitches hurt, and when he tries to express his repentance again, she seems to find it boring. She asks how he spent the night, and sure enough, asks him to describe Mrs. Eccles. About your height, he answers carefully. A few freckles. Her husband's been wonderful, she says. He's okay, Rabbit says. He makes me nervous. Oh, everybody makes you nervous. No, now that's not true. Marty Tothero never made me nervous. I just saw the poor bastard stretched out in a bed up the hall. He can't say a word or move his head more than an inch. He doesn't make you nervous, but I do. Is that right? I didn't say that. I just make you so nervous you desert me for 2 months. Over 2 months. Well, Jesus, Janice, all you did was watch television and drink all the time. I mean, I'm not saying I wasn't wrong, but it felt like I had to. Her face goes into that bored look again, head switching from side to side as if to keep flies from settling. He says, shit, this gets her. I see your language hasn't been improved by living with that prostitute. She wasn't a prostitute, exactly. She just kind of slept around. Where are you going to stay now, until I get out of the hospital? I thought Nelson and me would move into our apartment. I'm not sure you can. We didn't pay any rent on it for 2 months. Huh? You didn't? Well, my goodness, Harry. You expect Daddy to keep paying rent? I didn't have any money. Well, did the landlord put our furniture out on the street? I don't know. The trouble with you, kid, is you just don't give a damn. Really. Well, listen to you. He does listen to what he's been sounding like, remembers how he felt last night, and after a pause begins all over again. Hey, he says. "I love you." "I love you," she says. A nurse comes and says, "Mr. Angstrom, if you want to see your baby, the nurse is holding them to the window now." He's quite unprepared when the nurse in the baby room, where little bundles with heads like oranges lie in rows of supermarket baskets, brings his girl to the viewing window, and it's like a damper being slid back in his chest. A sudden stiff draft freezes his breath. People are always saying how ugly new babies are. Maybe this is the reason for the amazement. The folds around the nostril seem miraculously precise. The tiny, stitchless seam of the closed eyelid runs diagonally at great length, as if the eye, when it is opened, will be huge. In the tilt of the protruding upper lip, he reads a delightful hint of disdain. She knows she's good. What he never expected is he can feel she's feminine, feels something both delicate and enduring in the arc of the long pink cranium, furred in bands with black, licked swatches. The nurse's painted lips wrinkle a question through the glass, and he calls, "Oh, okay, yeah," and gestures, throwing his hands, fingers splayed, to the height of his ears. "She's great," he adds. But the nurse is already returning his daughter to her basket. He goes back to Janice with the wind swirling through him, and in the soap-scented hall he gets the idea. They should call the girl June. This is June. She was born in June. It will please Janice because of the J. But Janice has been thinking about names too, and wants to call her after her mother, Rebecca. They compromise. Rebecca June Angstrom. The straight path is made smooth. Mr. Springer has been paying rent on the apartment all along, it turns out. He had arranged it without troubling his daughter. He always had a hunch Harry would come back. Harry and Nelson move in and start housekeeping. Nelson is a help. Closer to 3 now than 2, the child can carry out orders, understands that his toys belong in the bushel basket, and feels the happiness in cleanness, order, and light. Straight out from the apartment's windows, pausing as he vacuums the floors, Rabbit can look across the town in the wide farm valley with its golf course. He thinks, my valley, my home. He takes Nelson with him in the car the day he goes to tell old Mrs. Smith that he has to quit working in her garden. Old man Springer has offered him a job in one of his used car lots. They go to visit Mom Springer. The child is delighted. Nelson loves her, and this makes Rabbit like her. Though she tries to pick a fight with him, he refuses to fight back, just admits everything. He was a crumb, a dope. He behaved terribly. He's lucky not to be in jail. Actually, there's no real bite in her attack. Nelson is there for one thing, and for another, she is relieved he has come back and is afraid of scaring him off. And your wife's parents can't get at you the way your own can. It is quite different at his own parents' home. He and Nelson go there to find his mother is angry about something. Her anger hits his nostrils as soon as he opens the door. He thinks she's disgusted because he left Janice and committed adultery. And out of the clear blue sky, she suddenly explodes that by asking him abruptly, "What's going to happen to that poor girl you lived with in Brewer?" Her? Oh, she can take care of herself. She didn't expect anything. But as he says this, he tastes the lie in it. Nobody expects nothing. Her mouth goes thin. "I'm not saying anything, Harry. I'm not saying one word." But of course, she is saying a great deal, only he doesn't know what it is. But one thing at least, his father pays some attention to Nelson, rolling a lemon back and forth with him on the kitchen floor. "You're going to be a ball player like your dad?" "He can't, Earl. He has those little Springer hands." "For Christ's sake, Mom, lay off," Rabbit says. He doesn't want the boy to have Springer hands, and if he does, he likes the kid a little less and hates his mother for this. It's as if she wants to pull down everything, even if it falls on her. That night he lies in bed, diagonally, so his feet do not hang over, and fights the tipping sensation inside him. Like an unsteered boat, he keeps scraping against the same rocks. His mother's ugly behavior, Ruth's silence the last time he saw her, his mother's oppressive not saying a word. He rolls over on his stomach and seems to look down into a bottomless sea, down and down, to where crusty crags gesture amid blind death. Tothero, lying there with his tongue floating around under twittering jellied eyes. No, he doesn't want to think about that. Think about something pleasant. Ruth at the swimming pool, the way she lay in the water without any weight, and then out of the water, standing over him with the towel. Him, looking up at the secret hair, and then her face laying beside him, huge and burnished and mute. No, he must blot Ruth and Tothero out of his mind. Both remind him of death. They make on one side this vacuum of death, and on the other side the threat of Janice coming home grows. That's what makes him feel tipped, lopsided, and under everything, like a faint, high hum, Eccles' wife's wink. That wink, what was it? Was it a chink of light in a dark hall, saying, "Come in"? He awakes before dawn, being tipped again, frightened on the empty bed, with the fear that Nelson has died. He gets up and goes to hear the boy breathe, and returns to a bed whose wrinkles the first stirrings of light are etching into black lines. On this net, he lies down and steals the hour left before the boy comes to him, hungry and cold.
Only the lonely. Only the lonely. I know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely.
On Friday, Janice comes home. For the first day, the presence of the baby fills the apartment like a little casket of incense fills a chapel. When Rebecca nurses, Nelson becomes agitated, climbs against them, pokes his fingers into the seam between the baby's lips and his mother's udder, and pushed away, wanders around the bed, intoning a promise he has heard on television. "Mighty Mouse is on the way." Rabbit himself loves to lie beside them, watching Janice manipulate her swollen breasts, the white skin shiny from fullness, thrusting the thick nipples like a weapon into the blind, blistered mouth that opens and grips with birdy quickness. Eccles comes calling and says he hopes to see them in church. Their debt to him is such they agree it would be nice of them, at least one of them, to go. Harry is happy to do it. Not merely out of an uneasy affection for Eccles, though there's that, but because he considers himself happy, blessed, forgiven, and wants to give thanks. As he kneels in a pew on a red stool, his head buzzes with joy, his blood leaps in his skull, and the few words he frames, God, Rebecca, thank you, bob inconsecutively among senseless eddies of gladness. When he sinks back into a sitting position, the head in front of him takes his eye. A woman in a wide straw hat. She is smaller than average, with narrow, freckled shoulders. She turns to look down at something beside her. His breath catches. It is Eccles' wife, Lucy, rising within reach of his arm. "Hello," she says. "You're the last person I ever expected to see here." Why? He is pleased that she thinks of him as an ultimate. "I don't know. You just don't seem the institutional type." At the door, Eccles clasps Harry's hand with a warm grip that tightens at the moment it should loosen. "It's exhilarating to see you here," he says, hanging on. "Nice to be here," he says. "Nifty sermon." Harry hears Eccles tell Lucy, in about an hour. "The roast's in now. Do you want it cold or overdone?" overdone, he says. Lucy's straw hat nears his shoulder. Do you have a car? No. Do you? No. Walk along with us. Her proposition is so bold, there must be nothing in it. Nevertheless, the harp string in his chest, tuned to her, starts trembling. Lucy pulls off her hat and shakes her hair. The church crowd thins behind them as they walk, her little girl Joyce trailing behind. How are your wife and baby? She asks. Fine, they're just fine. Good. Do you like your new job? Not much, but I don't suppose you're supposed to like your job. If you did, then it wouldn't be a job. Jack likes his job? Then it's not a job. That's what he says. He says it's not a job, which is the way I'd treat it. But I'm sure you know his line as well as I do. He and I, in some ways, I guess, are alike, Rabbit says. I know. Her odd quickness in saying this sets his heart ticking faster. She adds, but naturally it's the differences that I notice. Her voice curls dryly into the end of this sentence. What is this? He has a sensation of touching glass. He doesn't know if they're talking about nothing or making code for the deepest meanings. He asks, like what? Oh, like the fact that you're not afraid of women? Who is? Jack. You think? Stepping down off a high curb, he takes her arm. Her bare arm remains cool in his fingers. At the rectory, she asks, Do you want to come in? He can see the inner lining of her lower lip, wet against her teeth. A delayed gust of the sermon sweeps through him. No thanks. Really, I can't. Oh, come on. You've been to church? Have a reward. Some coffee. No, look. His words come out soft, but somehow big. You're a doll, but I've got this wife now. She takes a quick step backward. I beg your pardon. Then he is watching her tight, round butt jounce up the walk. But thanks anyway, he calls in a hollowed, gutless voice. He hates being disliked. She slams the door behind her so hard the knocker clacks by itself on the empty porch. Eckel's wife has jazzed him up, and he reaches his apartment clever and cold with lust. His wish to make love to Janice is like a small angel to which all afternoon tiny lead weights are attached. The baby squawks tirelessly. The noise makes Nelson fretful and whiny. Around 5 in the afternoon, Janice begins to cry. Tears burble down her dark, pinched face. She'll conk out. Have a drink. Say, what is this? I've been trying not to drink. I thought you didn't like me to drink. I thought it might loosen you up. I'm no tenser than you are. What's eating you? You're the ones upsetting Becky. She was fine all morning until you came home. Forget it. Just forget it. Forget the whole frigging thing. As the shadows begin to lengthen, Becky relaxes, and suddenly she is quiet, leaving behind solemn, guilty peace. Couldn't have been colic. Maybe she was just hungry. Maybe I'm out of milk. How could that be? You've been like footballs. She looks at him, squinting, sensing what's up. Well, don't think you're going out to play. But he thinks he spies a smile there. Later, he persuades Janice to have a drink. She says it tastes hateful, but after a while consumes it. And in bed, he imagines he can feel its difference in her flesh. They lie sideways, facing each other. He kisses her dark, hard face, scented with alcohol. She does not turn her head. He rubs her back. Is he kindling the spark? His wrist aches. He dares to undo the 2 buttons on her nightdress. She submits to this maneuver, and he is filled with joy. He relaxes and pulls the bow on his pajama waist, then is totally destroyed by her voice, her thin, rasping, dumb girl's voice, saying by his ear, "Harry, don't you know I want to go to sleep? Well, why didn't you tell me before? I didn't know what you were doing. I thought you were just being nice." "Oh, so this isn't nice." "Well, it's not nice when I can't do anything. Not for 6 weeks. You know that. Just a touch, Jan. Just let me touch you. Can't you go to sleep?" She's killing it by making him feel sorry for her and ashamed and foolish. The whole sweet thing is just sweat and work and his ridiculous inability to finish it against the dead-hot wall of her belly. She pushes him back. "You're just using me. Please, baby, I'm almost there. It feels so cheap." Her daring to say this infuriates him. He gets out of bed and his pajama bottoms fall down. She turns over on her back into the center of the bed and explains stupidly, "I'm not your whore, Harry. Damn it, that's the first thing I've asked from you since you came home." "You've been wonderful," she says. He's putting on his clothes. "I'm going out." "Don't, Harry, don't." She asks for it, lying there in a muddle, sobbing. And outside, down in the town, a motor guns, and he thinks of the air and the trees and the streets stretching bare under the street lamps, and goes out the door. She does not sleep. In the morning, making breakfast, she breaks an orange juice glass. It just drifts away from her thumb into the brittle sink. When she bends over Nelson to serve him his Rice Krispies, he looks up at her and wrinkles his nose. He smells sadness, and its familiar odor makes him timid with her. "Daddy go away?" All she has to do is answer yes. "No," she says. "Daddy went to work early this morning. He'll be home for supper, like he always is." She puts good Becky in her crib, and wonderfully doesn't once hear her cry. Then she goes to the kitchen and makes herself a little drink, mostly ice cubes, just to keep sealed shut the great hole that is threatening to pull open inside of her again. She takes just a sip, and it's like a swallow of light that makes everything clear. She must just arch over this one little gap, and at the end of the day, after work, Harry will be back, and no one will ever know. She sits on the rug with Nelson, finds his coloring book and crayons, and they sit together, coloring opposite pages until she gives him his lunch and a warm bottle and puts him down for a nap. She gets her drink. It's silly not to have that one more sip that will make her capable of completing the arch to the end of the day. Then, like a stab, the phone rings. "Hello? Darling, it's Daddy." "Oh, Daddy! Baby, is Harry sick? It's after 11 and he hasn't shown up at the lot yet." "No, he's fine. He went out early this morning. He went to show a station wagon to a prospect who had to go to work or something. Everything's all right, Daddy." She thinks on the whole she's been clever enough with him. She thinks she deserves a drink. The brown liquid spills down over the smoking ice cubes and doesn't stop when she tells it to. The telephone rings again, angrier than the first time, and she runs to it. "Janice," her mother's voice, even and harsh, "your father thinks Harry's gone again, is he?" Janice closes her eyes. "He went to Allentown to sell a car." "Janice, are you all right?" "What do you mean?" "Have you been drinking?" "I'm coming right over." "Mother, don't! Everything is fine. Stay away. He'll be back tonight." "I'll be over in 20 minutes. You go to bed." Janice replaces the receiver and looks around her with horror. The apartment is a mess. The baby has begun to cry. The crib is nightmarishly smeared with orange mess. "Damn you. Damn you," she moans to Rebecca, and lifts the little thing out and wonders where to carry her. She takes her to the armchair and unpins the diaper. She notices a glass of whiskey and takes a long, stale swallow. All the while, Rebecca screams. Her face goes red with each squall, and Janice closes her eyes and thinks how really horrible it is of Mother to come and ruin her day just to make sure she's lost Harry again. She runs a tub and wishes she could have the bath. She scoops Rebecca into her arms and carries her into the bathroom, held sideways against her breasts. At least the baby will be clean when Mother comes. She kneels and does not expect her sleeves to be soaked. The water wraps around her forearms like two large hands. Under her eyes, the pink baby sinks down like a gray stone. With a sob of protest, she grapples for the child, but the water pushes up at her hands, and the slippery thing squirms. She has a hold, then loses it. Then she knows, while knocks sound at the door, that the worst thing that has ever happened to any woman in the world has happened to her.
Only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. Only the lonely know this feeling ain't right.
Hey, Jack? Jack Eccles? This is Harry Angstrom. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. No, you're not. I've been trying to call my apartment and nobody answers, and I'm kind of nervous about it. I didn't spend last night there, and I'm getting sort of a prickly feeling. I want to go home, but I want to know if Janice has done anything like call the cops or anything. Do you know? Harry, where are you? At some drugstore in Brewer. One of the uses society seems to have for Eccles is to break tragic news, and the cave of his mouth goes dry as he braces for the familiar duty. I guess to save time I'd better tell you over the phone, he begins. Harry, a terrible thing has happened to us. When you twist a rope and keep twisting, it begins to lose its straight shape, and suddenly a kink, a loop, leaps up in it. Harry has such a hard loop in himself after he hears Eccles out. He steps into the sunshine outside the drugstore, swallowing, to keep the loop from rising in his body and choking him. It's a hot day, the first of summer. The heat comes up off the glittering pavement into the faces of pedestrians. Harry waits at a corner with some sweating shoppers for a Mount Judge bus, number 16A. When it hisses to a stop, it is already packed. He hangs from a steel bar in the rear, fighting to keep from doubling up, with the kink inside. He had ridden one of these buses last night into Brewer and gone to Ruth's apartment, but there was no light on and nobody answered his ring. He wandered up and down and found a low-looking motel and bought a room. He didn't sleep very well. A neon tube fizzled outside the window, and some woman kept laughing in another room. He woke up early enough to go back to Mount Judge and get a suit and go to work, but something held him back. Something held him back all day. He tries to think of what it was, because whatever it was, murdered his daughter. Wanting to see Ruth again was some of it. But what really kept him in the city, despite the increasing twisting inside that told him something was wrong back home? What kept him walking was the idea that somewhere he'd find an opening. For what made him mad at Janice wasn't so much that she was in the right for once, and he was wrong and stupid, but the closed feeling of it, the feeling of being closed in. What held him back all day was the feeling that somewhere there was something better for him than listening to babies cry and cheating people in used car lots, and it's this feeling he tries to kill, right there on the bus. He closes his eyes and tries to kill it. The kink in his stomach starts to take the form of nausea. When he gets to the Springer's house, Mrs. Springer comes to the door and shuts it in his face. But he knows from the gray Buick at the curb that Eccles is in there, and in a little while Jack comes to the door and lets him in. He says, conspiratorially in the hall, "Your wife has been given a sedative and is asleep." "The baby?" The undertaker has her. Rabbit wants to cry out. It seems indecent for the undertaker to be taking such a tiny body. But he nods. He feels he will never resist anything again. Eccles goes upstairs, and Harry sits in a chair and watches the light from the window play across an iron table of ferns. Somebody comes down the stairs with an erratic step. He doesn't turn his head to see who it is. He doesn't want to risk looking anybody in the face. A furry touch on his forearm, and he meets Nelson's eyes. The child's face is stretched shiny with curiosity. "Mommy sleep," he says, in a deep voice, imitating the tragedy-struck voices he's been hearing. Rabbit pulls him onto his lap. His body acts as a covering. He pulls the boy's head down against his neck. Nelson asks, "Baby sick?" "Baby sick." Big water in tub," Nelson says. What did the poor kid see? Harry holds him fast with a kind of terror. Eccles comes downstairs and stands there studying them. "Why don't you take him outside?" he asks. "He's had a nightmare of a day." They all three go outdoors. Eccles takes Harry's hand in a long, quiet grip and says, "Stay here. You're needed, even if they don't tell you." After Eccles pulls away in his car, he and Nelson sit in the grass by the driveway and throw bits of gravel down towards the pavement. The boy laughs and talks, but out there the sound is not so loud. The grass grows damp, and he wonders if he should sneak Nelson in the door and go. Mr. Springer comes to the door and calls, "Harry." They go over. "You and the boy come in." They go into the kitchen, and Nelson eats a sandwich. Harry refuses everything except a glass of water. Mrs. Springer is not in the kitchen, and Harry is grateful for her absence. "Harry," Mr. Springer says. "Yes, sir?" "Life must go on. We must go ahead with what we have left. Though Mrs. Springer is too upset to see you now, she agrees. We had a talk and agree that it's the only way. What I mean to say is that we consider you our family, Harry, despite this accident." Harry shields his eyes with his hand. They feel hot and vulnerable to the light. "Thank you," he says. "I promise I'll keep my end of the bargain," he brings out, and stops, stifled by the abject sound of his voice. What made him say bargain? "I know you will," Springer says. "Reverend Eccles assures us you will." Harry puts Nelson down to bed and goes, walking home in the soupy summer dark, which tinkles with the sounds of dishes being washed. He climbs Wilbur Street and goes in his old door and up the stairs. He lets himself in and turns on all the lights as rapidly as he can. He goes into the bathroom, and the water is still in the tub. It shocks him. He rolls back his sleeve and reaches down and pulls the plug. The water swings and the drain gasps. With a crazed vertical cry, the last of it is sucked away. He thinks how easy it was, yet in all his strength, God did nothing. Just that little rubber stopper to lift. He expects never to go to sleep that night, and so awakening with the slant of sunshine, he feels his body has betrayed his soul. He dresses in haste, more panicked now than at any time yesterday. The event is Reela. He goes over to the Springers. Janice is awake. He goes upstairs and lies down beside her in the bed. She clings to him and sobs into the cup between his neck and jaw. Her face has been shrunk. Her body seems small as a child's, hot and hard. "It wasn't your fault," he tells her. "It was mine." They cling together in a common darkness. She makes him breakfast, The cereal drowned with milk, the coffee scalded, in her style. With Nelson, they walk over to the apartment to get clothes for the funeral. Rabbit resents her being able to walk. He liked her best when she was unconscious. What kind of second-rate grief is it that permits them to walk? The sense of their quick bodies just going on, wrapping their hearts in numbness and small needs, angers him. When they get inside the apartment, she gives a sharp sigh and collapses against him. She indicates a chair. "Here I sat," she tells him, "Monday morning, watching the sun come up." Her voice is lifeless. He doesn't know what she wants him to say, and says nothing. This is the woman he must steer with care down a lifelong path, away from Monday morning. "We can't live here," she says. "I know we can't. But where can we live? We'll figure it out. Come on." The funeral parlor was once a home, but now is furnished the way no home ever was. Unworn carpets of a very pale green deaden their footsteps. They are ushered into a little pink side room. Harry can see into the main room. On a few rows of auditorium chairs, about 6 people sit, 5 of them women. The little white coffin, with handles of painted gold, rests on a platform draped with a deep purple curtain. He thinks the curtain might draw apart and reveal, like a magician's trick, the living baby underneath. Janice looks in and yields a whimper. A familiar old blue Plymouth slows against the curb outside. His heart leaps and trips his tongue. Here come my parents. He hasn't spoken to them since it happened. He was afraid. Mrs. Springer gets up, and Harry places himself between her and Janice. Standing in formation like this, he can at least show his mother that he's reformed, that he's accepted and been accepted. His mother comes through the door first. Her eyes sweep the group, and she steps forward to him with reaching, curved arms. "Harry, what have they done to you?" She asks this out loud and wraps him in a hug as if she would carry him back to the sky from which they have fallen. In a boyish, embarrassed reflex, he pushes her away and stands to his full height. As if unaware of what she has said, his mother turns and embraces Janice. Eccles has arrived by some other entrance, and from a far doorway beckons them. The 7 of them, Harry, Janice, Nelson, and their parents, file into the room where the flowers wait, and take their seat on the front row. Black-clad Eccles reads before the white casket. It annoys Rabbit that Eccles should stand between him and his daughter. It occurs to him what no one has mentioned. The child was never baptized. Eccles reads, "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die." The angular words walk in Harry's head like clumsy blackbirds. He feels their possibility. Eccles doesn't. His face is humorless and tired. His voice is false. All these people are false, except his dead daughter, the white box with gold trim. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather his lambs with his arms and carry them in his bosom. Shepherd, lamb, arms. Harry's eyes fill with tears. His daughter is dead. June gone from him. His heart swims in loss. Never ever to hear her cry again. Never see her marbled skin again. Never cup her faint weight in his arms again, and watch the blue of her eyes wander in search of the source of his voice. Never. The word never stops. There is never a gap in its thickness.
If you're lonely, heartbreak, only the lonely. 'Cause the lonely 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 heartbreak, only the lonely. '
The cemetery is beautiful at 4 o'clock. Its nurtured green nap slopes down somewhat parallel to the rays of the sun. Tombstones cast long slate shadows. Up a crunching blue gravel lane, the procession moves in second gear. Its destination, a meek canopy smelling of earth and ferns. The cars stop. They get out. Swallows in a wide ball dip and toss themselves above a stone cottage, a crypt. The white coffin is artfully rolled on casters from the hearse's resonant body onto crimson straps that hold it above the small, nearly square but deep-dug grave. The small creaks and breaths of effort scratch a pane of silence. The flowers have followed them. Here they are, densely banked within the tent. Behind Harry's feet, a neat mound of dirt, topped with squares of sod, waits to be replaced, and meanwhile breathes a deep word of earth. Silence. The Lord is my shepherd, therefore I can lack nothing. Eccles' voice is fragile outdoors. Rabbit's chest vibrates with excitement and strength. He is sure his girl has ascended to heaven. An electric switch is turned. The straps begin to lower the little casket into the grave and stop. Eccles makes a cross of sand on the lid. An ungloved hand throws crumpled petals. The straps whine again. Janice, at his side, staggers. He holds her arm, and even through the cloth it feels hot. A small breath of wind makes the canopy fill and luff. The smell of flower rises towards them. And the Holy Ghost, bless you and keep you now and forevermore. Amen. Eccles closes his book. The sky greets Harry. A strange strength sinks down into him. It is as if he has been crawling in a cave, and now at last he has seen a patch of light. He turns, and Janice's face, dumb with grief, blocks the light. "Don't look at me," he says. "I didn't kill her." This comes out of the mouth clearly, in tune with the simplicity he feels now in everything. Heads talking softly snap around at a voice so sudden and cruel. They misunderstand. He just wants this straight. He explains to the heads, "You all keep acting as if I did it. I wasn't anywhere near. She's the one." He turns to her, and her face, slack as if slapped, seems hopelessly removed from him. "Hey, it's okay," he tells her. "You didn't mean to." He tries to take her hand, but she snatches it back like a trap and looks toward her parents, who step forward. His face burns. His embarrassment is savage. Forgiveness had been big in his heart, and now it's hate. He hates his wife's face. He sees that among the heads, even his own mother's is horrified, blank with shock, a wall against him. A suffocating sense of injustice blinds him. He turns and runs, uphill, exultantly. Behind him his name is called in Eccles' voice, "Harry! Harry!" He does not turn to look. He runs, cutting through the stones across the grass towards the woods. The distance to the dark crescent of trees is greater than it seemed from beside the grave. The romping of his body turns heavy. The slope of the land grows steeper. He arrives between the arms of the woods and aims for the center of the crescent. Turning, he can see through the leaves, back down the graveyard, to where, beside the small green tent, the human beings he left cluster. Eccles is halfway between them and him. He has stopped running. His black chest heaves. Rabbit crouches and runs raggedly. His hands and face are scratched from plowing through the bushes and saplings that ring the woods. He turns to see if he has left the people behind. No one is following now. He hurries on, scrambling wildly, and comes out of the woods about a half a mile below the Pinnacle Hotel. As he swings along, jauntily hanging his coat over his shoulder on the hook of one finger, Janice and Eccles and his mother and his sins seem 1,000 miles behind. He decides to call Eccles, like he'd send somebody a postcard. He deserves at least a phone call. Rabbit rehearses what he'll say. "It's okay," he'll tell him. "I'm on the way. I think there are several ways. Don't worry. Thanks for everything." What he wants to get across is that Eccles shouldn't be discouraged. He goes to the payphone on the mustard-colored wall and looks up Eccles' number in the book. His wife answers, dryly. "Hello?" Rabbit shuts his eyes, and her freckles dance in the red of his lids. "Hi, could I speak to Reverend Eccles, please?" "Who is this?" Her voice has gotten up on a hard little high horse. She knows who. "Hey, this is Harry Angstrom. Is Jack there?" The receiver at the other end of the line is replaced. That bitch. Poor Eccles, married to that bitch. He feels simplified by this failure. He goes out across the parking lot and seems to leave behind all the poison she must be dripping into the poor guy's ears. His heart is murmuring in suspense, but it is in the center of his chest. That lopsided kink about Becky is gone. He has put her in heaven. He felt her go. If Janice had felt it, he would have stayed. He rings Ruth's bell. The buzzer answers, and he quickly snaps open the inner door and starts up the steps. Ruth comes to the banister and looks down and says, "Go away! Go back to your wife!" "I can't. I just left her." "You're always leaving her," she says. "No, this time it's different. It's really bad." "You're bad all round." "Why?" He stands there, a yard away from her, excited and helpless. It's only been a few weeks, but she is changed, graver in her motions and thicker in the waist. She looks at him with a contempt that is totally new. "Why?" she repeats in an incredulous, hard voice. "Let me guess," he says. "You're pregnant." Surprise softens the hardness for a moment. "That's great," he says, and takes advantage of her softness to push her ahead of him into the room. "Great." He tries to embrace her, and she backs away behind a chair. "Go away. Don't you need me?" "Need you?" she cries, and he squints in pain at the straining note of hysteria. "I needed you that night you walked out. Remember how much I needed you? Remember what you made me do?" "She was in hospital," he says. "I had to go." "God, you're cute. God, you're so holy. You know, I was stupid enough to think you might call. I wanted to, but I was trying to start clean. I didn't know you were pregnant. Why didn't you tell me?" "What would you have done? You're no help. I didn't because I thought you'd leave me if you knew. You left me anyway, so there you are. Please, get out. Why are you here?" "I want to be here. It's right. Look, I'm happy you're pregnant. It's too fucking late to be happy." "Why? Why is it too late?" He's frightened. Women went away to have it done, he knew. There was a place in Philadelphia even the kids in high school had known about. "How can you sit there?" she asked him. "You just killed your baby, and there you sit." "Who told you that?" "Your ministerial friend, your fellow saint. He called about a half hour ago." "God, he's still trying?" "I said you weren't here. I said you'd never be here." "I didn't kill the poor kid. Janice did. I got mad at her one night and came looking for you, and she got drunk and drowned the poor kid in the bathtub. Don't make me talk about it." She looks at him with dull wonder and says softly, "Boy, you really have the touch of death, don't you? Get out. God, Rabbit, just looking at you makes me sick." He blushes to feel this sincerity, the sensation he had counted on, of being by nature her mate, hasn't come. His hands and legs are suffused with a paralyzing sensation of reality. His child is really dead. His day is really done. This woman is really sickened by him. He asks her, flat, "Did you get an abortion?" He closes his eyes and he prays, "God, dear God, no, not another. You have one. Let this one go." When he opens his eyes, he sees her standing there, trying to bring off a hard swagger in her stance. His voice goes sharp with hope. "Have you?" A crumbling film comes over her face. "No." Up he gets, and his arms go around her, without squeezing, and though she stiffens at his touch and twists her head sideways, he has regained that feeling. "Oh," he says, "that's good. That's so good. I'm so glad." He tries to nuzzle the side of her face. His nose touches wet. "You have it," he coaxes. "Have it. Don't touch me." She jerks out of his arms. Her face flares. Her body is bent forward like a threatened animal's, as if his touch is death. "I love you." "That means nothing from you. Have it, you say. How? Will you support me? How many wives can you support? Your jobs are a joke. Maybe once you could play basketball, but you can't do anything now. What the hell do you think the world is? Please, have the baby," he says. "You gotta have it." She groans and turns and looks at the wall. "I'm hungry," he says. "Why don't I go out to the delicatessen and get us something? Then we can think." She turns, steadier. "I've been thinking. I'd like to marry you. I would. I mean whatever I said, but if we're married, it'll be all right. Now you work it out. You divorce that wife you feel so sorry for about once a month. You divorce her or forget me. If you can't work it out, I'm dead to you, and this baby of yours is dead too. Now, get out if you want to." He stands up and says, "That's fair. I'll work it out. What do you want from the store?" "I don't want anything," she says. He decides to walk around the block to clear his head and pick his path. He doesn't know what to do, where to go, what will happen, and the thought that he doesn't know seems to make him infinitely small and impossible to capture. Rabbit comes to the curb, but instead of going to his right and around the block, he steps down, with as big a feeling as if this little side street is a wide river, and crosses. He feels the wind on his ears, his heels hitting heavily on the pavement at first, but with an effortless gathering out of a kind of sweet panic, growing lighter and quicker and quieter, he runs. Runs. Runs.
If you're lonely, heartbreak, only the lonely.
Toby Jones was reading the final chapter of Rabbit Run by John Updike. It was abridged by Eileen Horn and produced by Clive Brill, and it was a Brill production for BBC Radio. All next week here on 4Extra, the former presenter of BBC